Welcome. In this module, we're going to be exploring the subject of the Office of Vocation and Church Discipline. The Office of Vocation was introduced with the new structure in 2019, and it is a very new phenomenon for the United Church of Canada. So we are still very much feeling our way into all of what it means, the ramifications, and so on. The tradition in the United Church, as it was in the Methodist and Presbyterian and Congregationalist churches before that, was for a form of what might be called mutual accountability. For instance, if a concern was raised about the conduct of a minister, that concern would be first of all addressed by the presbytery. In other words, by laity and clergy from the surrounding local congregations. If the concern was found to have merit, it would move forward to the conference. Again, lay and clergy, most of them not staff folk, evaluating concerns raised about someone from their midst. The same could be said of the process of moving towards recognition, ordination, or commissioning. The evaluative work, the interviewing and discerning and so on, was undertaken by folk who were part of the individual's congregation, presbytery, and conference. That has changed in the Office of Vocation structure in ways that we'll get to. I'd be the first person to agree that there were many flaws in the old model, particularly in relation to questions of discipline. It asked presbyters, both lay and clergy, to take on quasi-judicial roles for which they had neither training nor expertise. I've chaired a couple of judicial reviews over the years, and they were incredibly difficult to do well. And I'm not sure we did do them well. In the church, our natural orientation is towards pastoral care and concern, and these do not always map tightly onto issues such as natural justice. By being caring for some, we may eliminate the natural justice for others. In the candidacy process, there was far too much of personality involved, and those doing the work at both presbytery and conference were often well-meaning but ill-equipped for the task. And certainly there was no uniformity across the breadth of the church in either discipline or candidacy. Of course there were standards, but the application of those standards is what varied. And there was a significant amount of repetition and duplication. So, one of the goals of the restructuring process was to take those issues, candidacy and discipline, and move them from the hands of well-intentioned amateurs into the ambit of people with higher levels of training and specialization. How successful that was is something we need to regularly discuss as we ponder the Office of Vocation and the practices of discipline. So, think about your readings. What questions arose for you? I want to draw your attention to a couple of things. In section J.2.1, it's noted that ministry personnel are responsible for recognizing the authority of the denomination and fulfilling all their obligations to it as required by the Office of Vocation. Now, this phrase replaces the previous promise of the clergy to submit to the mutual discipline of presbytery. So, as clergy, we are responsible to the denomination, and, in practice, we experience that as accountability to the Office of Vocation. Now, the Office of Vocation is a national structure, and it's overseen by a Board of Vocation. The Board of Vocation is an elected body of lay and ministry personnel, nominated by the General Council Nominating Committee and elected by either the General Council or the General Council Executive. It's represented in the regions by Office of Vocation Ministers. Office of Vocation Ministers are national staff regionally deployed. Usually, but not always, usually they cover some 3 regions. Now, in its simplest terms, the primary task of the Office of vocation is to maintain the role of those who are deemed to be accredited United Church of Canada ministers. That includes the noting of the standards of ministers and the status. Are we in good standing or not? It means keeping the record of the various special notes, supervisor training, interim ministry training, and so on and so forth. And from that apparently simple task actually flows a wide range of responsibilities that are accomplished through Office of Vocation ministers and several different committees and boards, such as the Candidacy Board, the Accreditation Board, a Response Committee, and so on. I want to run through these quickly to give you a sense of the scope of the work and invite you to post any queries you might have, in the discussion section for this module. The Accreditation Board, the standards for accreditation for recognition for the various streams of ministry. In other words, what does the church expect of those who give leadership in the name of the church? Continuing education. Right now, each ministry personnel receives 3 weeks of continuing education time per year, but there is really no control over whether or how those weeks are used. Now, this board has been slowly moving to make that a little bit more rigorous. You may be familiar with other professions where there is a continuing education expectation, and there is often a rubric about what the member is expected to do with that time. The Accreditation Board also oversees the mandatory workshops that are required of ministry personnel and others in order to maintain good standing. Then there is a credentialing committee. There is a regular stream of individuals who seek to enter the United Church of Canada from other Christian traditions. Those are generally people who are recognized as ministers within their home tradition. And so they're seeking to be recognized as ordained or commissioned ministers within the United Church tradition. There are also those who are seeking to make moves within the order of ministry, for example, moving from diaconal ministry to ordained ministry or vice versa. And there are also those who are seeking recognition as intentional interim ministers, educational supervisors, military and other sorts of chaplaincies. Those all fall under the responsibility of the National Credentialing Committee. There is a response committee. This is the committee that deals with complaints when they are raised, a process that we'll get to in a moment. It also ensures that there are trained and supported reviewers, investigators, consultants, conflict resolution facilitators, and people with other expertise as required to respond to issues, complaints, conflicts which may arise within the church. The response committee is responsible for receiving and assessing concerns and determining the most appropriate process or the most appropriate committee to address those concerns deemed eligible of action. At the national level, there is a remedial committee. It's responsible for the compliance piece that I mentioned a moment ago to make sure that all of the people who claim to be United Church ministers are in good standing and to enact some degree of penalty if that is not the case. When there are allegations of misconduct or ineffectiveness, this group receives the report of the investigators and decides on actions, which can include things like a warning, a reprimand, a formal hearing, and so on, all of which are listed in Section J. Then there is an Accessibility Assessment Committee. This group determines if a ministry personnel has been or is incapacitated and the extent of that capacity. It supports the minister's personal rehabilitation where that is appropriate. It oversees the restorative care plan service providers and the appropriate counsel and minister, an office of vocation minister, as they work with a minister who has deemed to be incapacitated to some degree and help them return to the greatest level of health that they can. It's always important to remember that oversight in the United Church of Canada includes both ministry personnel and communities of faith. Both have folk whose job it is to see that they are being effective and healthy in their ministry. One is done by the Office of Vocation, the ministry personnel, the other by the region, the communities of faith. But they often touch on one another, of course, so it's very important that the Office of Vocation Minister and the regional staff are working from the same page. Otherwise, those in congregations can receive really mixed messages, and those mixed messages exacerbate already difficult situations. There is a formal hearing committee and an appeal committee. Hopefully, you will not have reason to deal with others, but you need to be aware of them so you have a rough idea of what the process and the players look like. Now, I want to stress, and I can't stress this too much, that there are specific processes for sexual assault and sexual harassment complaints that are quite different from what I'm about to outline. And you need to be aware of those processes for sexual assault and sexual harassment complaints in case you are asked about them. But they are different than the ones that I'm just about to lay out. If there is a formal hearing, and a formal hearing is sort of the end stage of the various committees and processes that I've already outlined, each formal hearing and each appeal is comprised of 3 elected members of the Board of Vocation. That's the national overseeing body. So here's what happens. A response committee receives a complaint. It decides that it has merit, and it is forwarded to the remedial committee. The remedial committee then investigates the complaint and tries to determine an appropriate response. If the remedial committee deems that this is a sufficiently serious item, it will forward the whole file to a formal hearing committee to conduct a formal process. So, the response committee deals with issues like misconduct, effectiveness, incapacity of ministry personnel. And those sorts of concerns can be derived from a variety of places. It can come from different places within the congregation, the governing body. It can come from other ministry personnel, from overseeing groups like the region, and so on. There are a variety of those, and they are listed in Section J. It's worth noting, and this is important for you, that the remedial and response committees do not apply to candidates for ministry. Every concern regarding a candidate for ministry goes to your candidacy board. So, in step 1, the response committee receives a concern, and it has to decide whether or not to consider it. It won't consider it if the event took place 12 months ago or more, again with an exception relating to sexual abuse and sexual misconduct. It will not review it if the act in question is not misconduct or ineffectiveness. There are times when we can do things as clergy which upset people, but which are entirely appropriate for our role. There are times when, in, for example, living out the policies and traditions of the United Church, we may offend somebody who thinks differently or comes from different traditions. That's not misconduct or ineffectiveness. Sometimes the concerns expressed are frivolous or vexatious or without substance, and those won't be considered either. For example, if somebody complains that they don't like what their minister wears on a Sunday morning or something like that, or they think that their clergy should drive a North American car and they're not. I mean, there are all sorts of vexatious concerns, and they don't go anywhere. Also, concerns which seem to be raised for an improper purpose, like if after talking to the complainant you can tell that this is not really about what happened, this is somebody who wants to get at the minister. So, in other words, the response committee is deciding whether or not there actually is a case. They want to determine whether or not the concerns reveal facts that, even if they're true, do they constitute misconduct or ineffectiveness or incapacity? Mm-hmm. You can be told things about me, even disturbing things. But the question is, even if those are true, do they fit any definition of misconduct, ineffectiveness, or incapacity? The party who raises the concern will be offered an opportunity to provide additional information, and if that additional information is not forthcoming, then the concern will not be considered. And there is a process for notifying the person concerned, and the board, the the response committee will work to determine what is going on. They will inform the minister that a complaint has been received and ensure that pastoral care is being offered to all parties. Now, if the decision is made that the complaint is worthy of a response, then it goes to the appropriate body or person. There may be an accessibility assessment. There are times when, for instance, because of changes in health, mental and or physical health, we are no longer able to do as effective a job as we ought to. So maybe it needs to go to an accessibility assessment. We haven't been actually declared to be unwell. We're not on medical leave, but maybe we're not functioning as well as we might. And a little bit of assistance, a little bit of restorative care might improve our functioning. The response committee can send this to a conflict resolution facilitator, assuming both parties are agreeable, somebody who can work between the two. Sometimes there's a reviewer, sometimes there's an investigator involved. And reviewers and investigators have different types and different degrees of skills. What the response committee chooses to do with the complaint is not subject to an appeal. They have the authority to do with the complaint whatever they want, including dismissing it. So, after the decisions of the response committee are made, then various people may be assigned to tasks and reviews and investigations, and they will come back with reports. And this is done as quickly as possible because everybody recognizes that while this is still pending, it's a tense time for everyone. They may find that the ministry personnel has indeed fulfilled all the functions of ministry. They've done what they're supposed to do effectively. They may find that they have not done what they were supposed to do effectively. There's been something happen that it renders their ministry less than fully effective. And or there may be reasonable and probable grounds to believe that ministry personnel have done something that properly warrants discipline. We may not have exact proof, but we've got enough people talking about it and so on. So there are standards for this. And that all goes to the remedial committee for review and decision. So it's not the same people receiving and investigating the complaint doing the decision making on what the response should be. And the remedial committee can accept the findings of the report or reject the findings of the report or send it back with other questions. We need more information. Now, should the remedial committee agree that there's something real here, then they have to determine what the ministry personnel has done. They haven't fulfilled their functions, they've engaged in misconduct, or they believe that there is probable grounds to assume that the minister has acted in a discreditable way. Then they can do a variety of things. They can look at any prior concerns about this particular ministry personnel. Is this a repeat pattern? Is there any previous reports of how this individual has dealt with previous concerns? Is there, they may seek input from the person concerned if this has to do with sexual misconduct prevention and response. They may seek reliable information from the regional council, and they will certainly ask for any submission from the ministry personnel themselves to express opinion about what's being decided. The remedial committee will then declare that the matter is dismissed, that the ministry personnel status is not in good standing, and or that the ministry personnel will be suspended and the matter will be referred to another group to develop a directed study program, will be brought forward to a formal complaint with a recommendation for disciplinary action. And the disciplinary action could be many different things, including and up to having the minister's name placed on the discontinued service list. Discontinued service list, DSL, disciplinary. This is the United Church's closest equivalent to defrocking somebody. It says that this person is no longer a minister of the United Church of Canada. Now, let's assume that the complaint has been found to have grounding and the various bodies are convinced that the ministry personnel did in fact do something which was contrary to our understanding of proper and ethical ministerial behavior. The variety of responses could be, there's a wide variety of responses. If the ministry personnel is complying with whatever the directed program is, so perhaps the discipline is that they need to undertake some growth and awareness, they need to take some sensitivity training, they need to do something in regards to their speaking or their patterns in regard to their counseling or whatever. If the ministry personnel is doing what they have been directed to do, then the Office of Vocation will continue that ministry personnel's salary during the directed program. And that'll be overseen by effectiveness support. And they will say to the remedial council, look, Minister X, you told them to do these things. They have done them, and not only have they done them, they've done them well. We recommend that they be returned to good standing. And if the remedial committee accepts that, then the minister is returned to good standing. On the other hand, if the ministry personnel chooses not to do what they've been directed to do, has not completed the program successfully, simply says, there's no way I'm doing any of this, then the Effectiveness Support Committee will report that, and a formal hearing is held. Now, a formal hearing is a very serious matter. It's very much like a courtroom procedure. It involves lawyers and so on. The decision of a formal hearing committee or an appeal committee will be provided to the applicable regional council. The decision of a formal appeal a formal hearing committee or an appeal committee is final and binding and can only be appealed with leave to the judicial committee of the General Council. So when we get to this level, we are talking about expensive processes, we are talking about very detailed processes, and processes in which you must have legal advice. Now, let's assume that we've gotten through all the other things, we've come to a formal hearing, and during the formal hearing, it's been proven that the complaint is in fact valid. There are a list of things found in Section J that the formal hearing committee may decide are appropriate responses to what has happened. Everything from remedial work to restitution to being formally rebuked to being suspended to being removed from an office that they hold to being put on the discontinued service list, disciplinary, which means they cannot call themselves a United Church minister, they cannot function as a United Church minister, and so on. They may even be expelled from the United Church of Canada if the situation is serious enough. Don't let any of that keep you awake at night. The number of people who actually end up in front of a formal hearing is minuscule. There may be occasions when complaints are made about you, and there will be a process to determine whether or not those complaints are valid, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't, because misunderstandings do arise, and not everybody who may interact with a member of the United Church clergy understands the various constraints and policies and practices within which we operate. The one board that you are most familiar with now is the Candidacy Board, and it oversees and directs the entire process from the first expression of interest in becoming a minister right to the point where the individual is recommended to the region for accreditation. Now, all of these boards are provided with training. They're provided with standards and rules, and the intent is that there be an equal and seamless process from one end of the country to another. The reality is, of course, that there is a degree of variation because we are talking about human beings, and human beings differ in the ways in which they do things. But that's the intent, that there be a level of transparency, that there be a level of uniformity in that treatment, and that the people who are dealing with each of these matters in each of these boards not only have training, but they also have the opportunity to develop some expertise. And that is really helpful. As I said, personalities get involved and you may encounter those, but it's important to know what the rules are, or at least where the rules are located in the manual, so that you can turn to them and know what the appropriate steps are in different times and different circumstances. So that's the Office of Vocation and the matter of official discipline for ministry personnel. Thanks.